Bonjour, everyone. Hopefully you can now see my slides.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for this opportunity to talk about a subject that is close to my heart. Over the next 19 minutes, we're going to explore what we might be trying to achieve through knowledge transfer and exchange with patients and the public. We'll then look at how we can make sure that we get the language we use to communicate about trials right, how we can get our messages right, using the right tools for the job, and getting those tools to the intended audience. You'll notice that throughout this talk, I will keep coming back to the importance of working in partnership with patients and the public, as this is central to achieving many of our aims. I will try to draw on current evidence on how we can achieve knowledge transfer. However, some of the aspects of what I'll be talking about are under-researched, so there isn't always a robust evidence base to guide our practice. I will also draw on practical examples and lessons I've learned over 15 years of working in health research communication. Before we get into the meat of what we're exploring this morning, I need to explain what I mean by some of the terms I'll be using, as unfortunately terminology in this field varies from organisation to organisation, let alone country to country. The first term I want to define is patient and public involvement in research. By this, I mean patients, carers, and members of the public are active partners in research, rather than the subjects of research. So it's about research being done with patients, carers, and the public, rather than to them. This definition comes from Involve, which is the organisation that was set up by the National Institute of Health Research in the UK to support patient and public involvement. In some of the settings where the trials I work on take place, for example, in Africa, we often use the term community engagement instead. Community engagement is the process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geographic proximity, special interest, or similar situations to address issues affecting the well-being of those people. So that's the definition from CDC in America. This terminology may be preferable to patient and public involvement in the context of prevention studies, where the people you're trying to recruit to your trial are not patients, unlike treatment trials. So what are we trying to achieve through knowledge transfer? Knowledge transfer and exchange with patients and the public is important throughout the research cycle. In the developing stage of the trial, patient and public involvement can help us make sure we are asking a question that is relevant to patients and designing our trial in a way that is acceptable. Without this, we risk developing a trial that will struggle to recruit participants. At this stage, our focus should be on listening to what patients and the public have to tell us. But in order to get at that, we need to make sure we're communicating our ideas clearly in a way they can understand. According to Christina Staley's 2009 report, patient and public involvement at the developing stage of the trial can have impact identifying topics for research, shaping the research agenda, initiating research projects, influencing funding decisions, and the design of the study. For example, while research is being developed, involvement has led to consideration of a wider set of topics than if academics or health professionals had been working alone. It has also opened up new areas of research. In some instances, patient and public involvement has shifted the focus of research to be more in line with patients' interests and concerns. In projects where patients have been involved from the earliest stages, they have helped to reshape and clarify the research question. Patient and public involvement has also influenced what outcomes are measured, as well as how they are measured. As a direct result, research findings have been made more relevant and useful to the end users. So if we could have the first poll up, please. I would want to find out from you, how much experience do you have of involving patients and the public at the developing stage of your trial? Thank you. So please vote. Thank you. So there's a bit of a, sorry. Thank you. So there's a bit of a mixed bag there. A few people with lots of experience, but most with some or none. So I hope that some of what I say will kind of inspire you to do this more. So thank you. So moving on to thinking about what we're trying to achieve through knowledge transfer at the doing stage of the trial. At this stage, effective knowledge transfer and exchange can help us to recruit and retain participants, which, as you know, is essential for successful clinical trials. Patient and public involvement is often reported to increase participation rates, for example, by making sure that recruitment procedures and materials have been sensitive to the needs of participants, and that there aren't aspects of the trial that might put people off, like lots of extra blood tests or many more clinic visits. Patient and public involvement might also open up access to and engagement with typically underserved communities, and so impact on recruitment and generalizability that way. So if we can have poll 2 up now, that would be great. I want to find out how much experience you have of involving patients and the public at the doing stage, so when your trial is recruiting patients. Thank you. So again, a mixed bag, and many people with not huge amounts of experience at this. So moving on now to look at the telling stage of the trial, which is where much of my work focuses. At the telling stage, when we have results from a trial, knowledge transfer and exchange with patients and the public is crucial for a number of reasons. Firstly, we have to do some knowledge transfer activities to comply with guidelines and legislation governing clinical trials. For example, the Declaration of Helsinki states that all medical research subjects should be given the option of being informed about the general outcome and results of the study. The EU Clinical Trials Directive also mandates that plain language summaries should be posted online. Ethics committees may also have requirements about who the results of trials are shared with. Previous research shows that around 9 out of 10 trial participants want to be informed of the results of their trial, but in many cases this does not happen. Given we rely on people volunteering to take part in our research, we can't afford to treat participants like this. In fact, we need to build support for clinical trials in the public more generally, so if they are asked to participate, they understand the importance of trials. Therefore, we need to communicate more broadly about how research can make a difference. In the unit where I work, not only do we depend on people volunteering to take part in our research, but also much of our funding comes from charitable or government sources, which ultimately comes from the taxpayer or charity giver. Effective communication about trials, their results and their impact can strengthen support. Patient and public involvement in dissemination has been reported to increase the likelihood of people acting on the findings. Collaborations between researchers and end users of research have encouraged both the direct use of the research, so changing policy and practice, as well as its more conceptual use, so changing awareness, knowledge and attitudes. The effects of involvement at this stage have been to help engage the target audience, make the findings more accessible and the messages more powerful, enhance the credibility of findings, and help devise novel forms of feedback. As you heard in the introduction to this event, the main goal of clinical research is not to increase the sum of knowledge, but ultimately to improve prevention, treatment and care for patients. Effective knowledge transfer and exchange of patients and the public can help us achieve that. So my final poll, how much experience do you have of involving patients and the public at the telling stage of your trial when you have results to communicate? So again, a mixed bag, and few people have lots of experience in this area. I can tell you from my own personal experience that patient and public involvement when we want to communicate results of a trial can be incredibly helpful. And so to explore that a bit more, I'm going to use the case study of the PROUD trial. So PROUD was a trial which looked at the use of pre-exposure prophylaxis, or known more shortly as PrEP, to prevent HIV. And PrEP involves HIV negative people taking a daily tablet that includes 2 drugs that are commonly used to treat HIV. And PROUD was the first trial of PrEP for gay men in the UK, and it included around 500 men. And if you are interested in this case study, you can read more about the involvement that we had in it using the link on this slide. So in the developing stage of the PROUD trial, HIV charities were part of the group that developed the trial. Researchers also engaged with the UK Community Advisory Board, which is a network of community HIV treatment advocates across the UK. Researchers also set up a community engagement group made up of HIV charities with national and regional representation. The impact of this community engagement work was to increase researchers' confidence in the acceptability of comparing immediate PrEP to deferred PrEP. It also led for researchers to expand the inclusion criteria to help with recruitment. The community engagement group revised the patient information sheets and consent form to make sure they were clear and engaging for the target audience. And the group also informed the development of the communication strategy for the trial. At the doing stage of the trial, each of the trial oversight committees included community representatives. The researchers continued to work with the UK Community Advisory Board, and the community engagement group was expanded to include additional groups to represent BAME populations, so Black and Asian minority ethnic populations. The gay media and social networking apps were also invited to join the group, and the researchers actively involved trial participants, for example, through face-to-face and online meetings. So what impact did this patient and public involvement or community engagement have? At the doing stage, it informed the conduct of the trial and plans for a subsequent trial. In the early stages of the trial, recruitment was challenging, but working with the expanded community engagement group allowed researchers to identify things that were stopping people from joining the trial. And the HIV charities, gay media and apps were able to communicate messages that addressed these concerns and leading to improvement in recruitment. The participant involvement highlighted that some people were struggling with adherence and identified an option to support adherence. The community engagement was particularly impactful at the telling stage of the PROUD trial. It ensured clear and consistent messaging and that the messages being put out were non-stigmatizing for participants. This clear messaging meant that the trial results were accurately and widely reported in the mainstream media. There were multiple voices, lots of people talking about the PROUD results, including clinicians, HIV charities, and trial participants. But the messages they were giving were consistent and accurate. The voices of the PROUD participants were particularly powerful in getting across the need for this HIV prevention option and the impact it had had on their lives. The community engagement work around PROUD evolved into United for PrEP, which was a lobby group advocating for PrEP to be made available on the National Health Service, which was ultimately successful. So here are a few photos of some of the community engagement work and the work around sharing results with the wider public. So the first step in knowledge transfer and exchange is getting the language right and to make sure that it is understandable for your target audience. Written health information is often hard for patients and the public to understand because of the complexity of the information presented, the use of unfamiliar scientific and medical jargon, and it's often given at a time when people are having to navigate complex health systems and a time of stress. Later this morning, you will hear from other speakers some practical advice on writing for lay audiences. Patient and public involvement can help you make sure your language is understandable to your target audience. Thinking about your target audience is key. For example, there may be some medical jargon that patients with a disease may be familiar with, but the general public won't. For example, men with prostate cancer may be very familiar with PSA tests, whereas the wider population aren't. So depending on who exactly your audience is, PSA may or may not be understandable without further information. Language is powerful, and we need to be careful that the language we use is not stigmatizing or disempowering for patients and the public. Having worked in the field of HIV for over a decade, I've learnt that it matters. In fact, UNAIDS produces terminology guidelines drawn up in partnership with the HIV advocacy community, showing which terms we should use and which we should avoid. I'll give you two examples of where patient and public involvement has helped me with making sure the language I'm using sets the right tone. I've recently been conducting research on how we share the results of clinical trials with participants in an ovarian cancer trial. The outcome measure we had results from the main trial was progression-free survival, which is jargon. So we used a simpler explanation: improve how long women with ovarian cancer lived and delay the disease getting worse. When we got patient and public involvement input on the draft results summary, some of our contributors really didn't like this explanation, as it made it seem inevitable that the disease was going to get worse. So we changed it to delay or prevent the disease coming back or getting worse, and improve how long women with ovarian cancer lived. Another example was in developing an animation for children living with HIV to explain what a pharmacokinetic study involves and is trying to find out. We got a youth trial board to give us feedback on a draft script. They told us that the language we'd used around HIV medicines fighting the virus was difficult for them emotionally in the context of a condition they will have to live with for their whole lives. This sort of imagery can contribute to self-stigma. Instead, they suggested that we talk about the medicines making the virus go to sleep or stay asleep. In addition to getting the language right, we need to make sure that the focus of the message is right. Again, patient and public involvement can tell us what patients and the public are most interested in. How we frame our messages, whether to focus on potential gains or losses, also makes a difference. A systematic review by AHRQ found that loss-framed messages used in conjunction with narratives, so stories, were more persuasive, more convincing than either loss-frame messages used together with statistical information or gain-frame messages in conjunction with either stories or statistical information. There are many different tools we can use to communicating about trials. When deciding which ones to use, we need to think about our audience. How do they normally receive information? Which types of communication tool will they be comfortable with using? How much time are they likely to want to spend engaging with our information? And how will it attract their attention? There's no point tweeting if our target audience doesn't use Twitter. It's not just our audience that influences which tools we should use. We also need to think about how our message impacts on our communication tools. It might be inappropriate to share some complex or sensitive messages using tools that don't allow for that complexity to be explained or would look unsensitive. And there's no point issuing press releases about things the media will not consider newsworthy. Obviously, our resources also play a part in which tools we use. Some have little or no cost, whereas producing documentary style films or animations can be resource intensive. We also need to think about whether we want to use tools that don't just broadcast our knowledge, but allow two-way exchange. We have used Twitter question and answer sessions where people send in questions and have it answered by a panel, and face-to-face events to allow that exchange and dialogue rather than just broadcasting. And of course, individual conversations can be another effective form of knowledge transfer and exchange. Patient and public involvement can help us choose communication tools that are appropriate for and acceptable to our target audience. And working in collaboration with patient or community groups may help with producing these communication tools. We've used a wide variety of tools depending on the audience, including press releases and briefings for the media, articles in patient group newsletters, social media, animations, written results summaries, films, graphic novels, infographics, events, and even in one case, a music video. We also need to think about how we get our communications tools to our audiences, so what our communications channels are. This could include the media and social media platforms, or us sending things out directly. Working in partnership with patients and the public, and community groups may help us get our message to our audience. For example, they might have newsletters or websites that could reach thousands of people, far more than we could on our own. So to summarise, good knowledge transfer and exchange with patients and the public can improve our trials, increase the impact of our research, build support for clinical trials. Involving patients and the public as partners can help us achieve this. I'm just going to leave you with a little advert for a journal that publishes a lot on this topic. So if you are interested, do check that out. Thank you.